Okay, so thanks everybody for joining us today. I really appreciate you taking the time out of your busy day to join this webinar. My name is Ben Day and I look after the commercial side of the ARMS business here in Australia and New Zealand. We've got this webinar today for you on the topic of harnessing technology, innovation and big data to reshape asset strategy management and unlock unrealised value. As I said, at ARMS Reliability, so we bring you this webinar as a focused organisation looking after asset strategy management, asset performance. We do a combination of engineering expertise, software solutions and training. As mentioned, the topic today will cover how digital transformation and asset management has brought exponentially more data. We'll explore how asset strategy management harnesses data-driven insight to create the constant evolution of asset strategies. Some of you may have caught part of this at Mainstream, where we first presented the paper. Today, as you will no doubt realise, you logged in via GoToMeeting. What we're going to do is record this and make it available to everybody post-webinar, so keep an eye out for it in your inbox. We also just keep in mind we have quite a few participants today, so you'll have questions no doubt throughout the presentation. Just punch them into the question comment section there on your GoToWebinar, and we'll take them here and curate them, and at the end present some of them back. We'll address them towards the end of the webinar. So I'm just going to introduce now Jason Apps, who will be doing the presentation. He's the CEO of ARMS Reliability. Thanks, Jason.
Thanks, Ben, and welcome everyone. Thanks for taking the time to have a listen and look at the webinar. And this presentation really is based on the premise that many organisations are leaving potentially millions of dollars on the table. So it's really about how do we make the most of the data and technology available to us and actually realise that value that's readily available to us. So you've probably seen this quote before. It's Benjamin Franklin's sort of famous quote that there's really not too much that's certain in life other than death and taxes. I think right now I'd probably add data to that list. I think the proliferation of data is enormous right now. We are going through what's called the digital transformation in many areas. We're connecting up to the Internet of Things. We've got asset performance data coming in. We've got work order history coming in and work order data that we've had coming in for some years. So we've basically got a whole lot of data coming in, and you know, we use the term big data now to describe exactly that situation. So what I find quite fascinating is that really we've got all this data coming in. It's really not data that we're chasing. It's actually performance that we're chasing. And traditionally we think of wanting high performance specifically, but actually we probably don't. And we've done a bit of research in this area, and really what people are chasing is a predictable level of performance. So a predictable level of performance on the basis of what your business is. So that might be reducing failures, it might be reducing risk or managing risk, it might be managing and reducing and optimising costs. So dependent upon your business and what service it is that it provides and who your customers are will drive what means high performance for you. And specifically then, it's about providing that predictable level of performance. So I guess the question is, how do we utilise the technology and the data to actually deliver that predictable level of performance? And we think the way to do that is through the use of a process. So this is how you turn data into performance improvement. You have a process that drives who does what, how it happens, when it happens, and obviously the inputs to that would be a certain level of and quality of data. Matter of fact, some people hesitate around implementing a process because they don't have the data. In our experience, putting in a process actually drives better quality data because you're actually using the data now. You understand which data it is that you need to use and how you need to use it. So it actually drives a better quality of data through use of the process. So we think the main reason that we have problem really delivering this predictable level of performance and actually getting a process that works and delivers this performance is that we've actually confused a little work management and strategy management. So we have this quite simple concept that if you have poor execution, in other words, if you don't go out and perform work well or plan work well, then we would say that you have a sort of poor execution of tactical work. So typically what organisations do then is implement a work management process. So that's quite common in most organisations. We probably have a process flow somewhere on the wall. We have several people who contribute to that process. And we know, how it's initiated. People raise work orders or there's system-generated work orders. We know who plans. We know who schedule. We have people go out and perform the work and execute the maintenance, and we get potentially feedback on that, and we sort of refine some of that content. So if you implement a good work management process, you can move from a position of poor execution to effective execution. And that's quite typical in most organisations, pretty well defined, pretty mature. The problem, of course, is if you have a poor strategy, then all you effectively do is become really good at executing poor strategy. So you perhaps won't make the improvements that you're chasing. So and you may find yourself in this position, and most people get in this position through the application of maintenance tactic sort of libraries, maybe just adopting the OEM type plans. They don't perhaps have a defined or well implemented improvement process. Perhaps there's no real commitment to refining and reviewing PMs. Perhaps you're making poor investment decisions initially. So there's a whole host of reasons why we might end up with a poor strategy. So if you actually want to improve your strategy, we're suggesting now that you need to implement a good strategy management. And that, of course, will take you from a position of poor strategy to effective strategy. Now, we agree, of course, that if you have poor execution but an effective strategy, you're still not in perhaps a great position. So the idea, of course, is to implement good work management and good strategy management, and that will lead to effective execution of an effective strategy, which will lead to predictable performance. And if you're in that position, then we're probably in a position where we're optimising CapEx or optimising OpEx spend, and we got well-defined and implemented continuous improvement of the strategy. So this is a real change for us in that we've separated out this work management and strategy management. We think it's quite confused. We think quite often organisations try and sort of connect the two together or muddle them up a little bit. We try to perhaps implement effective strategy management within our ERP or CMS system, which is really designed to support execution. So we've kind of got them muddled a little bit. So perhaps we define exactly what we mean by strategy, given we're talking about strategy management. So exactly what do we mean by strategy? So there's a number of levels we see in terms of strategy decisions. So we've got a tactical level. So for us, that's around how you go and execute regular, perhaps interval-based maintenance work. So it's when you perform the maintenance, who's going to perform it, what spare parts they need, how they're going to do it. So it's the ongoing maintenance type activities, what we actually go out and do to maintain our assets. So obviously making strategic decisions around how we're tactically going to maintain assets, typically done as a project and not as part of a strategy management exercise, which of course is only partially effective. So there's tactical level strategy decisions. Then there's asset or fleet level strategy decisions. So this would include how we choose to maintain an asset over its life cycle. Perhaps it's part of the selection process. Perhaps it's, what age do I replace it? What age do I do major overhauls or repairs? what size fleet do I have perhaps? So there's this sort of how do we manage this asset over its lifetime? It might even be, what intervals do we do major shutdowns or major system outages? All those higher level decisions around how we manage the asset. And then the third level is a portfolio level. So we may, on an individual asset basis, we may come up with several identified preferred options of how to manage the asset over its life or what tactics to perform. But perhaps we're constrained at a portfolio level. Perhaps our budget doesn't extend to cover all of the optimal decisions or strategies we've come up with. So at a portfolio level, then we've got to decide, well, which ones add most value to the business. And that may change. Of course, there's a connection between all of these. That may change what we need to do at a tactical level, because at a portfolio level, we don't have the funds available to do specific changes or overhauls. So that, the typical examples there are that we originally planned for, a pump station, a haul truck, a substation, a transformer, whatever it might be, to be replaced after 40 years. But right now, the capital money is not available. It delivers better value elsewhere. So we need to change our tactical approach to extend the life of that asset, which might not be optimal for that specific asset, but optimal on a portfolio level. So quite a lot in terms of, it's like a tiered strategy decision that we're talking about in terms of strategy management. So where has all this come from? Well, it's been a journey for us. Our purpose here at ARMS is to help our clients be safe and successful by making reliability a reality. So we've been in business for quite a while. We've been conducting reliability projects for a long time. And I guess that's evolved and expanded for us in terms of how we approach those things. So I certainly remember one of the first projects that I was involved in was it delivered really great results from a reliability optimization viewpoint. It was a coal shipping terminal, and we did the typical strategy review type exercise where we downloaded information from their CMMS system. We analysed it using Weibull analysis. We imported current plans. We optimised their strategies using a simulation-based approach to interval optimisation. Generated some revised maintenance plans, and the predictions actually forecasted that we would make significant savings and significant performance improvements. So that was a fairly typical study for us and pretty successful. I guess what we found over time is that it was quite difficult for a lot of people to implement the outcomes of those types of studies. So our original approach to solving that was to continue making reliability a reality, was to actually help them implement. So we delved in to understand SAP and Maximo and the available CMMS systems. How do they structure maintenance activities? How do we configure our outputs to push them into those systems, including directly linking up and integrating with those systems to push decisions straight into the system? I guess the next constraint we found was that whilst we might do that, if we revisited in 3 or 6 months' time to do an assessment of the performance improvements, quite often we'd find that some of those strategies have been changed by people who can directly go into the system and change the information. So we sort of got to this point where this is not being as effective as it could be, and we rethought how we approach these things. Initially, we approached them with a reliability engineering focus, and that as reliability engineers, we need to sort of do quite a lot of the work and expand our role in that process. And I guess where we are now is saying, well, perhaps that's not the best approach. Perhaps the best approach is to actually involve more people in the process and implement a strategy management process. So rather than constraining it to a single function, the same as a work management process where we have planners, schedulers, technicians, supervisors, managers, all sorts of people involved in that process, let's manage the strategy the same way. So the strategy may come from a reliability engineering decision, but there's lots of people involved in the management of that strategy. Once we make that transition, then there's a whole lot of efficiencies that come with strategy management in terms of effective deployment of strategies across an organisation. Of course, strategy management and work management are closely linked together. So here's some of the links. This is not a complete listing, but certainly some of the links in terms of how the processes connect together. Clearly, there's some links in the master data area, in particular the asset hierarchy, equipment criticality and equipment type are pretty foundation type connections. We're really interested in the equipment type here, so we can make decisions at an equipment type level based on its criticality and then deploy it to specific assets. Make and model can be very important, particularly where we want to bring in materials, so very specific material coding numbers for make model, and of course code groups so that we can improve in the future. At a maintenance plan level, then there's certainly an alignment of tasks that are come out of the strategy management process and how they line up to tasks that are deployed at a tactical level in the CMMS system. So plan structure and then corrective tasks as well, or secondary actions are all connected up. Of course, in the future, maintenance history becomes important in terms of continual review and update, and other considerations might be resources and bonds. So there's some very key links. Deciding which is the master and slave of those all those pieces of data or linked data is pretty key to structuring the asset strategy management to work with the work management. So how does this look in the landscape? This is how we see things plugging together. So organisations have a CMMS or an ERP system with this functionality in place. Our concept is that delivers work management. It's how it is structured, it's what it's structured to do, and people should structure it as best they can to support the execution of work. So we would house all the master data in here, the maintenance plans, you would plan and schedule inside here, you would execute, and you would get feedback. Alongside that and connected up, we would have an asset strategy management process. So it's about managing the strategy. So whilst you go execute work in the CMMS system, what you choose to go and execute would be an output of the asset strategy management. So what you choose to execute, how often you choose to do it, what spare parts you need to complete the work, how you actually go about it, so the work instruction type content, all of that is content associated with the strategy. And so we would manage that in the asset strategy management process. So it could also be expanded to include those other tiers of strategy, so asset investment, optimization, lifecycle costing to do the asset and fleet analysis, perhaps those shutdown interval or major outage interval optimization. So we're really here managing all of the strategy decisions, connected up to the work management, but very separate with its own defined process. And then we see asset performance management connecting into both of these things. So asset performance management is all around asset health monitoring, real-time monitoring of asset condition, interval-based monitoring as well, perhaps if we still go out on regular intervals and perform condition monitoring type activity, maybe algorithm or machine learning-based activity. So this is really about monitoring the performance of assets in operation and perhaps deciding to execute some work based on some parameters. So this is connected up to work management. Obviously, it may require some work to be executed. It's connected up to strategy management because strategy management may drive exactly which assets it's worth performing APM on and where we hook up monitoring versus interval-based maintenance or other types of maintenance. So three systems quite connected. Now, when you pull out asset strategy management from a work management process, the power now is that we can manage the content associated with strategy at an enterprise type level. So quite simply, what that enables us to do is to have some generic type content. So we might have potentially generic content, so the strategies that we might perform and how we might perform those strategies associated with common components we have. So it might be a pump, might be a circuit breaker, might be an open feeder, a weightometer on a conveyor, whatever it is, some kind of generic component that we've got lots of or a few of, we can have some generic level content, and then we can very quickly deploy that generic content to any installation of that particular component. Brings along with it the strategy. Now, the challenge when you do that, of course, is that not all of those things would be identical in terms of perhaps operating context or criticality, perhaps duty. So the strategy management process will allow you to create local variations of those generic content and still keep very connected. So really powerful, rapid deployment. Now, whilst that speeds up deployment significantly, the real power comes in the intelligent strategy that you can then create. And what I mean by that is that if you have a particular failure or in some way learn about a particular type of asset that we now need to implement a new task or change the way the instruction reads, or perhaps there's a new standard change that calls for a new frequency of task, whatever the change might be, someone on a particular site might implement that at a particular installation of this type of component. The strategy management process, by its nature, would detect that. You would know where else that content's been deployed, and you could very rapidly redeploy that decision to everywhere else that it adds value. So the asset strategy management process will drive you to have the best strategies that you have available on every asset all of the time in a continual learning environment, so that you've got very intelligent learning asset strategies. It also really allows you to make the most of your subject matter experts, and I call it sort of leveraging off the pockets of excellence that you might have in an organisation. There's always those technicians or resources that have been in an organisation for a long time that really understand a piece of equipment, how it works and how it runs, and get the best out of it. We might have that equipment elsewhere in our organisation, it just doesn't perform quite the same. So this is all about maximising that intelligence and redeploying it wherever it sits. So that's what asset strategy management is. So what isn't it? Well, it's not just the task library. Whilst that might be an element of asset strategy management and maybe the beginning point of generating some content, asset strategy management is much more than a library. It's about the consistent deployment of generic content, allowing for very specific local variations. By the same token, it's not just a failure mode effect library. Whilst failure modes are fairly consistent across equipment types, effect severity levels may not be. So we have to be really careful when deploying an FMEA type library, and strategy management would cater for that. And it's really beyond a strategy development or review project. So it's not a project, it is a strategy management process implemented like any work management process right alongside it. So what do you need to make this work? Well, you need a whole lot of infrastructure. So you need a good process, obviously defined, and people need to understand what it is. You need tools to support that process, and education, and obviously support. So if you think work management and what you have in place to support that in terms of process flows and tools, how we train people, how we have supports and quick reference guides associated with the implementation of that process, then strategy management is exactly the same. We need exactly the same level of infrastructure. But beyond that, I mean, the infrastructure is one thing, and we absolutely need it. But to be really successful, the key here is that we need triggers. So what will drive us to use the process? So in a work management environment, typically the triggers are that someone raises a notification because they need some work doing, or we have a system-generated work order, which sort of starts the process, and then we follow the process. In an asset strategy management environment, if we have the process, then it's about how do we trigger that process. And it really should be any change that anyone makes to a strategy type decision, and that may be on the basis of them looking into their system and determining, well, what's performing or contributing to poor performance. You know, what's not happening that I thought was going to happen, and vice versa. So where are the areas where my predictions don't match my actuals, where I'm spending too long to maintain assets, or they're failing too frequently, or they're costing me lots of money. It might be areas where we have a good strategy, but we actually are not keeping up with the execution. So the compliance to not plan compliance in the sense of did we meet the plan, but compliance of actually affecting planned maintenance that should be executed and should be in the system. So there's a whole host of triggers, and if the triggers are right, then the process will work, and we get to leverage and realise the value that's available to us. So again, it's all about, how do you realise the value that's available? Well, we need to make sure we've got the best strategies we have on hand on every asset all the time, and they're continually learning their intelligent strategies. So that takes us to the end of the formal presentation of the slides, and I think we may have some questions.
Yeah, so thanks, Jason. Appreciate that. We do have a couple of questions that have come in that I'll just ask you, and then we'll get some answers. So David has asked, how does RCA fit into ASM?
Yeah, actually, that's a good question. We didn't cover that in the presentation. So we focus mainly on the strategy decisions from a tactical level and asset level. So really talking about maintenance type decisions and then portfolio decisions. By the same token, root cause analysis obviously has a place in the continuous improvement process, and also provides a vehicle for us to leverage any great ideas or excellence that we have in the organisation across wherever it fits. So quite simply, whatever is the driver for improvement, and maybe it's a root cause analysis type investigation that's performed on a particular failure or process interruption or whatever it might be, and that determines that there needs to be some change. The strategy management process allows us to link those learnings to either generic components or to physical assets, so very specific assets, or to the generic content. And again, we can see wherever that generic content's been used and get the value from that effective decision or solution, and get the value from it right across the organisation.
Thanks, Jason. I have another question here from Shane. How do you deal with different operating contexts?
Okay, that's a good question as well. So this comes back to where asset strategy management process goes beyond just the typical library. And, again, this has been an evolution and learning for us, originally starting with libraries, and you learn very quickly that you can have the generic content associated with a particular item, so say a pump, but when you try and deploy that without the ability to flex it based on operating context, it's somewhat constraining. The typical response to that is to create actually more items in your library to deal with it, when in reality the underlying failure modes might be consistent, the tasks might be consistent. It's probably just the frequency that would change based on the operating context, or perhaps whether tasks are performed or not based on the operating context. So the strategy management process is such that it allows what we would call local variations. Then we can still use that same generic content. It allows us to deploy it across all of our assets, but support these local variations to deal with different operating contexts. So quite simply, a pump might be operating in a different duty, or perhaps we've got 200 pump stations. One of them's pretty critical because it's right near a school or whatever it might be. Then maybe it's got a different severity when it fails. So whilst the underlying equipment is the same and the generic content can be all captured in that generic equipment, when we deploy it to those different physical assets, this particular one we might create some local variations to deal with a different operating context and still deliver the right level of performance.
Great. Thank you. And I have another question here from Wendy, suggesting that it sounds like a big exercise, and I'm wondering where she would start.
It's another good question. I mean, where do you start? Well, there's probably a number of ways to go about that. You can step into anything slowly and easily, and start with easy strategy decisions, and then move on to building in the full process. The other alternative is to, of course, implement the process with the information and strategy content you have right now, and continually improve that over time. I think the biggest challenge most people find is that there is a big connection to the work management process. In any organisation, the people that administer and manage that process sometimes are quite disconnected currently from the strategy or reliability or asset management people. And so one way to approach it is just to actually start. And whilst you might be looking for strong connections and strong guidelines and framework to connect things up, you can actually make some simple assumptions and just implement the process, get some mileage out of the process initially, and basically demonstrate its power to everyone. It's really quite easy typically to find some assets that you have that are common across your asset base, deploy some generic content very quickly to those and demonstrate the value that you can realise by having a consistent strategy deployed on all of those assets. That's easy to update. Someone can review and approve it who's the right appropriate resource to do that, and start getting the value that way. And then you can move into more complex integrations and a wider implementation.
Thanks, Jason. Appreciate that. On that note, we'll probably finish up the webinar now, and just wanted to thank everybody for attendance. There's a couple of questions that we will come back to people on directly, so I appreciate that we didn't quite have time to cover them all. But we will make this recording available to everybody after the event, and we'll also send out some further information. So feel free to come back to us anytime with any questions. If you think of any throughout the afternoon or tomorrow, or you want to contact us, feel free to get in touch. You can probably reply to the email that will come out with some further information, and feel free to, as I say, get in contact with us anytime. But yeah, thank you, Jason, again, and thank you all for making the time to listen in, and hopefully you got some good value out of that. Thanks, everyone.